You find yourself in a bustling office, surrounded by individuals who are convinced they wield authority, yet none of them notice your subtle approach. This isn't about hiding in the shadows or whispering secrets. It's about mastering a time-honored strategy. Imagine standing in a room where everyone believes they hold the reins of power, yet they remain blissfully unaware of your quiet ascent. Power often doesn't announce its presence with fanfare. Instead, it seeps in through the cracks of daily routines, through the pauses in conversations, and during those fleeting moments when everyone is too preoccupied with maintaining their facades to realize who is truly reshaping the environment. This narrative isn't centered around coups, grand speeches, or shocking betrayals. It's about a form of acquisition so discreet that by the time anyone becomes aware of the shift, you're not viewed as a rival. You're seen as the answer to their problems. Machiavelli didn't merely suggest this. He meticulously charted it out. Not in the boisterous passages that everyone recites, but within the subtleties, the margins, the silences between his warnings, where he allows you to fill in the gaps, understanding that if you possess the acuity to read between the lines, you can act without seeking approval. If you appreciated this deep, investigative dive into the unknown, hit the like button. Our mission is to find the truth behind the vast mysteries of the universe. Subscribe to become an essential part of that mission. Let me pose a question to you. When was the last time you witnessed someone rise to prominence without the accompanying spectacle? Not the individual who bursts onto the scene with charisma, demanding everyone's attention, but rather the one who gradually finds themselves at the head of the table. And suddenly, no one can pinpoint when that shift occurred. That's not mere chance. That's not happenstance. That's the essence of silent acquisition. And it's not something exclusive to monarchs, corporate leaders, or revolutionaries. It's accessible to anyone who grasps the concept that power isn't seized. It's absorbed, much like water soaking into the soil. It's a slow, silent, and inevitable process. You don't need a title to begin to influence your surroundings. What you need is presence. Not the kind that demands attention, but a gravitational presence that doesn't ask for space. It creates it simply by being there. Think of it this way. Many individuals perceive power as a crown, something to wear, something overt, something that has to be bestowed upon you. Machiavelli viewed it differently. He regarded power as a current, invisible yet powerful, flowing just beneath the surface, shaping everything in its path without ever disrupting the water's surface. What if I told you that true influence often whispers rather than shouts? You don't grasp the current, you learn how to navigate it. Even better, you learn how to redirect it. And here lies the most perilous aspect. No one realizes the redirection has occurred until the river has already changed its course. That's the craft. That's the principle. Silent acquisition isn't about brute force, it's about frequency, being present consistently in the spaces where decisions are made. Not to argue, not to impress, but to become part of the established rhythm. The person who is always there when challenges arise, who provides solutions without seeking acknowledgement, and who remains unflappable amidst chaos, is the one who ultimately holds the keys, not because they demanded them, but because everyone else forgot where they were stored. Now, let's address a harsh reality. Most individuals hesitate to step into that space, not due to a lack of ambition, but because they've been conditioned to wait for permission, the nod, the title, the formal invitation. However, Machiavelli didn't advocate for waiting. He championed positioning. You don't request trust. You create circumstances where trust becomes the only rational choice. You don't plead for influence. You cultivate dependencies so subtle and natural that removing you would feel akin to taking out a load-bearing wall. And you do this without any fanfare, without speeches, without declaring your intentions. The moment you announce your ambitions, you make yourself a target. Conversely, when you remain understated, you become an integral part of the environment. Let's ground this in a tangible example. Picture yourself in an office setting, any office regardless of the industry. There's a project that's struggling, and everyone is aware of it. Meetings are being held, blame is being assigned, and in walks an individual who isn't the boss or the loudest voice in the room. They simply state, "I'll manage the client side," and then they vanish for 2 days, returning with updated timelines, refined deliverables, and a calm assurance that everything is under control. Consider the art of moving through life unnoticed, only to find yourself at the center of it all when it matters most. No grandstanding, no "look what I did," just results. And then, when the next crisis arises, guess who everyone turns to? Not the person with the title, but the individual who resolved the previous issue. That's silent acquisition. You didn't seek to lead. You didn't campaign for authority. You became essential by tackling what no one else dared to confront. And you did this without making it about yourself. This is where many falter. They mistakenly believe that acquisition requires visibility. They think they need to be seen, heard, and recognized. But Machiavelli understood that the louder you are, the more resistance you provoke. The quieter you become, the more space you occupy. Because silence is not devoid of meaning. It's strategic. It's the realm where assumptions take shape, where reputations are crafted without your direct involvement. When you refrain from shouting about your contributions, others begin to advocate for you, and that holds far greater power. A reputation built by others serves as armor. A reputation you forge yourself makes you a target. And here's the twist. This isn't manipulation in a tawdry sense. It's not about deceiving people. It's about comprehending human nature so profoundly that you position yourself where you're needed before anyone even recognizes their need for you. It's about discerning the atmosphere, not for ego, but for opportunity. Where is the friction? Where is the gap? Where lies the unspoken tension that no one wants to confront? That's your opening. Not to exploit, but to resolve. And in resolving, you embed yourself. You become the solution. And solutions? They aren't replaced. They are relied upon. You might wonder, doesn't this sound passive? You might think, isn't this a passive approach? Not at all. It's an active strategy, albeit one that operates beneath the surface. It's about choosing your moments with meticulous care, knowing precisely when to speak and when to let the power of silence take the lead. It's about forging connections, not through flattery or grand gestures, but through unwavering reliability. It's about becoming the topic of hushed conversations in the hallways. Have you posed the question yet? Not because you demanded it, but because you positioned yourself as the clear solution. That's the essence of it. That's the principle at play. You don't seize power through force. You allow it to gravitate toward you by becoming the only steady presence in a room filled with chaos. The stunning and slightly unnerving truth is that this approach is universally applicable. In boardrooms, among friends, in creative partnerships, within families, and across online communities, power knows no boundaries. It's dependent on behavior, not location. The individual who consistently appears with clarity, composure, and competence, without seeking applause, ultimately finds themselves at the helm, not because they took control, but because everyone else willingly surrendered it, often without even realizing it. So, here's your first step. Cease asking for permission. Stop waiting for someone to give you the go-ahead. Begin identifying the silent voids around you, those tasks that need attention, the tensions that require alleviation, and the questions left unanswered. Fill those gaps quietly and consistently, without drawing attention to yourself. Let your actions resonate more profoundly than any spoken words ever could. And watch, not with impatience, but with a steady resolve, as the dynamics in the room begin to shift around you. Not because you forced it, but because you became an inevitable presence. If you believe this is merely theory or clever rhetoric, hold on. What you've just absorbed is merely the tip of the iceberg. The real intricacies, the psychological triggers, the timing, the subtle misdirection, the art of making others believe the power was always yours. This is where it becomes perilous. This is where reality sets in. And you're not quite ready for that yet. Not until you've mastered the art of silence. Not until you've learned to move without causing a stir. So take a breath. Observe your surroundings. Position yourself strategically. And when the right moment arrives, and it will, you won't need to announce your presence. They'll already recognize that you're in command. You think you've grasped how power operates, but in truth, you haven't. Not truly, because what many mistake for power is often just noise masquerading as authority. The shouting, the titles, the exaggerated confidence, that's not true control. That's mere performance. Genuine power doesn't make a grand entrance. It doesn't need to. It's already seated at the table before the meeting commences. It has already influenced the agenda before anyone steps through the door. The individual wielding it isn't the loudest voice in the room. They're the one others turn to once the clamor subsides. This embodies silent acquisition, not a hostile takeover, but a gradual, patient embedding of influence so profound that by the time anyone recognizes it, reversing the situation would unravel everything. Machiavelli didn't spell this out in glaring letters. What topic do you believe deserves this kind of deep investigative format next? We need your suggestions. Let us know in the comments. He concealed it amidst warnings and hypothetical scenarios because he understood that if you're astute enough to grasp it, you're dangerous enough to wield it. People don't resist what they don't perceive as a threat. So don't be a threat. Be a source of relief. Be the tranquility amid the storm. Be the steady hand that guides the ship without ever taking hold of the wheel. This is how you gain control without ever asking for it. This is how you cultivate gratitude for your presence, all while subtly redefining the rules of the game. Now, let's delve into practical application. Not theoretical musings, not philosophical debates, and certainly not recycled quotes from some old text. I'm speaking about actionable steps you can take tomorrow. Imagine you're part of a group, whether colleagues, friends, or collaborators, and there's palpable tension surrounding a decision. Everyone is arguing, struggling to find consensus, stuck in a deadlock. Most individuals dive in, offering opinions, attempting to dominate the room. You, however, choose to wait. You allow the noise to crescendo. Then, as fatigue sets in, you don't provide a solution. Instead, you introduce a framework. What if we divided this into 3 phases? Or, what's the one aspect we can all agree on right now? You don't present yourself as the answer. You emerge as the structure. And structures aren't debated, they're utilized. Suddenly, you're not leading, you're empowering. And empowerment is the most potent form of leadership because it breeds no resentment. They express gratitude for your presence. While they feel acknowledged, you're delineating the boundaries of what's possible. This isn't manipulation. This is architecture. And here's where it deepens. You don't have to be the most intelligent person in the room. You need to be the most observant. Pay attention to how decisions genuinely unfold. Not how they're supposed to happen, but how they actually do. Who defers to whom? Who interrupts without facing consequences? Who speaks last? That's your roadmap. That's your blueprint. Silent acquisition isn't about overpowering the existing system. It's about comprehending its hidden wiring and gently redirecting the flow. You don't confront the hierarchy. You navigate around it by becoming essential to its operation. Consider the assistant who knows the location of every file, remembers every deadline, and anticipates every potential misstep. They don't require a promotion to run the show. They already do. And the higher-ups will fiercely protect them, not out of loyalty, but for self-preservation. Remove that individual, and the entire operation grinds to a halt. That's not dependence. That's dominance disguised as service. This is why Machiavelli never wasted time on brute force. He understood that overt grabs for power provoke resistance. Silent acquisition, on the other hand, evokes gratitude. You solve a problem that no one else dares to approach. But what happens when you take this approach too far? What if the very act of becoming essential leads to unforeseen consequences? Stay tuned, because the next phase of this journey will reveal the deeper implications of silent acquisition. Stay tuned, because the next phase of this journey will reveal the deeper implications of silent acquisition. The mundane tasks, the uncomfortable exchanges, the unremarkable labor. Before long, you find yourself no longer in the shadows. You become the cornerstone. And cornerstones never solicit raises. They don't campaign for promotions. Instead, they're offered opportunities because the thought of letting them go is inconceivable. That's the ultimate aim. Embed yourself so deeply into the organization that your absence feels like the unraveling of the entire structure. And you achieve this without ever declaring, "I am essential." You allow others to whisper it in hushed tones, in urgent emails, and in frantic conversations when you're not present. That's the moment of triumph. Not when you receive accolades, but when they feel the void in your absence. But here lies the pitfall many encounter. They mistake silence for inaction. This is a grave error. Silent acquisition is not about waiting idly. It's akin to hunting. It involves surveying the landscape for areas of tension and seamlessly slipping into those spaces like water finding cracks in rock. You are not stationary. You are strategic. In every interaction, every task, and every idle moment, you're probing. Where is the void? Where are the assumptions? Where lies the unspoken rule that, if adjusted, could transform everything? That's your playground. That's your leverage. And you don't need anyone's permission to navigate there. You only require awareness and courage. Let me paint a vivid picture for you. Imagine you're part of a creative team. Ideas are swirling. Egos are colliding. Deadlines are looming. Everyone is fixated on the grand vision, the brand identity, the flashy launch. You notice that no one is managing version control. No one is consolidating feedback. No one ensures that the designer has the latest draft from the copywriter. So, you begin to take action quietly, without any fanfare. You create a shared folder. You send gentle reminders. You become the unseen adhesive that holds everything together. 3 weeks later, when the client inquires about revision history and everyone freezes, you have it neatly organized and immediately available. Suddenly, You're no longer just a junior designer or a quiet intern. You've become the operational backbone. And guess what? When the next project kicks off, who gets appointed to oversee workflow? Not the loudest voice in the room, but the person who ensured the train stayed on its tracks. That is silent acquisition. You didn't campaign. You didn't negotiate. You simply became essential. And here's the kicker. This approach scales. It's effective whether you're interacting with 3 individuals or 300, whether you're in a fledgling startup or a century-old institution. Power is indifferent to size. It responds to necessity. Become essential, and titles lose their significance. You don't have to be the CEO to guide the company. You merely need to be the one who knows which levers to pull when the engine stutters. You don't need to be the charismatic founder to influence the culture. You just need to embody the behaviors that others unconsciously adopt. Influence isn't about volume. It's about consistency. It's about showing up day after day, addressing what others overlook until your method becomes the standard. And standards? They're seldom questioned. They're simply followed. Now, let's discuss timing. This isn't a slow burn that lasts indefinitely. There will come a moment, and you'll feel it in your gut, when the foundation you've established is strong enough to support weight. That's when you transition from being the fixer to becoming the architect. You don't announce this shift. You illustrate it. You make a small decision, something low risk yet visible, and you approach it not as a task, but as a precedent. You don't seek input. You present the way forward as if it's already been agreed upon. Here's how we will proceed. Not, what do you think we should do? Subtle. Yes. Powerful, immensely. Because language shapes reality. And when you communicate from a position of assumed authority, others will assume it too. That's not arrogance. That's calibration. You've earned that space. Now you claim it, not through declaration, but through tone. Machiavelli would appreciate this, not for its cruelty, but for its efficiency. He understood that humans follow patterns more than principles. If you become the pattern, the dependable rhythm amid the chaos, you won't need to convince anyone of your value. They will sense it. They will depend on it. They will safeguard it. And that's when true power crystallizes. Not in titles, not in speeches, but in the unspoken assurance that everything operates more smoothly when you're involved. That's the end game. That's the rule. You don't seize power. You create a situation where it's impossible to function without you. And you do it so quietly, so gracefully that no one even realizes they've relinquished control until they attempt to reclaim it and find nothing left to unlock. But don't become complacent, because the moment you believe you've reached your destination is when you become vulnerable. Silent acquisition isn't a final goal. It's a continuous discipline. It demands ongoing recalibration, constant observation, and unwavering restraint. The instant you start to believe your own legend, you become the noise. And noise is easily ignored. Remain fluid, remain quiet, remain indispensable, and above all, remain underestimated. That's where true power resides, in the space between what people perceive and what you are genuinely constructing. And if you think you've grasped the entirety of this concept, think again. Not yet. Because what follows, that's where the illusion of control begins to unravel. That's where you learn to wield absence as a tool, making them yearn for you before you've even departed. To transform your silence into an undeniable force. But that, That's a lesson for another time. That's for when you've mastered the art of being omnipresent without ever demanding attention.
So keep watching, keep positioning, keep solving what no one else will. So keep watching, keep positioning, keep solving what no one else will. When the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet, you won't falter. You will be the one who quietly maintains stability, effortlessly, and in a way that makes you irreplaceable, yet undefined.
They won't see it coming. Not because you're in hiding, but because you've blended into the background so seamlessly that your absence will feel like a seismic event. This is the ultimate layer of mastery. This is the pinnacle of silent acquisition. Victory doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room. Instead, it comes from becoming the very atmosphere that goes unnoticed until it vanishes, leaving a desperate void. Machiavelli grasped this concept better than anyone. The most lasting power isn't the sort that demands attention with a roar. It's the kind that exists quietly, persistently, and without fanfare, until its removal leads to the collapse of everything around it. This isn't something you proclaim. It's something you cultivate with patience, precision, and a ruthless commitment to your strategy. Let's strip away the pretense. This isn't about being agreeable or waiting for your moment.
It's about mastering the art of strategic invisibility, allowing others to believe they're steering the ship while you deftly adjust the controls from behind the scenes. You don't need to claim the head of the table. Instead, you should be the reason the table remains steady.
The moment you learn to recede without truly leaving, to vanish while still being indispensable, you become untouchable. Because how can anyone challenge someone who isn't visibly present? How can they replace someone who never claimed to be irreplaceable? The answer is simple. They can't. And that's precisely the point. Here's how you initiate this process. Begin on a small scale. Select a responsibility, a task, a rhythm that others shy away from. Not because it's beneath you, but because it's often overlooked. Whether it's scheduling meetings, following up on emails, or managing documentation, these are the mundane tasks that keep the wheels turning but rarely earn accolades. You take them on, not with a sense of martyrdom, but with quiet diligence. You execute these tasks so consistently that they become synonymous with your presence. But here's the crucial step. You gradually detach your identity from these responsibilities. You stop saying, "I handled that," and instead say, "It's taken care of." By removing yourself from the credit loop, you shift the perception. When people no longer associate the task with you, they begin to see it as an automatic part of the system. And that's when you've embedded yourself into the very DNA of the organization. No one questions the DNA, they simply rely on it. And then, you start to pull back. Not abruptly, but gradually. You allow a deadline to slip by, or you refrain from jumping in to resolve a miscommunication. You wait just long enough for someone to notice the silence, just long enough for the discomfort to build. That's when the real magic occurs. Not when you're solving every problem, but when you're stepping back from them. In that void, others will begin to feel the weight of what you've been managing. They will realize how much friction you've been absorbing, and instead of resenting your absence, they will panic. They will reach out, apologize, and plead for your return, not because you demanded it, but because they've felt the cost of your withdrawal. This isn't manipulation, it's calibration. You're not punishing them. You're educating them about the consequences of a silent engine coming to a halt. This is where many falter, fearing that pulling back may seem unreliable. But Machiavelli would scoff at that fear, for he understood that true power isn't established through presence, it's demonstrated through absence. Anyone can be seen as useful when they're in the spotlight, but the real challenge is making them feel lost in your absence. That's the threshold to cross. Once you achieve that, you transcend the roles of employee, colleague, or friend. You become the very infrastructure of the organization. Infrastructure doesn't negotiate. It doesn't campaign or plead for recognition. It simply exists, and the world adapts to accommodate it. Now, let's put this into perspective. Imagine you are the one who always organizes team outings, not because you enjoy planning events, but because no one else is willing to take on the task. You manage invites, venues, dietary needs, and agendas with quiet efficiency. Then, one month, you claim to be overwhelmed and ask someone else to take charge. They stumble. Dates clash, dietary requirements are overlooked, and the agenda becomes chaotic. When the event finally concludes, everyone breathes a sigh of relief, grateful it's over, and they quietly volunteer you to handle the next one. No one has to ask. They simply assume you will step in because you've demonstrated the cost of life without you. That's the goal. Not to seek praise, but to become presumed indispensable. Now, scale that principle across budgets, client relations, crisis management, creative direction, culture, and trust. The essence remains unchanged. You embed yourself, empower others, and then withdraw, just enough to allow the cracks to show. When you step back in, it's not as a savior, it's as a foundational element. The phrase you're aiming for isn't "thank you" or "great job," but rather, "oh good, you're handling it." That's the moment of surrender, the admission of your silent acquisition in its purest form. They aren't granting you power, they're acknowledging that you already possess it. And here lies the brutal elegance of this strategy. You never have to utter a word about it.
There's no need to remind them of your contributions, no need to keep score. The system itself becomes your ledger, silently documenting your influence. But what happens when the stakes are raised and the game changes?
How do you maintain your grip on power when the dynamics shift unexpectedly? The next step in this journey will reveal the answers you need to navigate the treacherous waters of influence. But what happens when the stakes are raised and the game changes? How do you maintain your grip on power when the dynamics shift unexpectedly? The next step in this journey will reveal the answers you need to navigate the treacherous waters of influence. When you are at the helm, the tranquility of your surroundings speaks volumes in your absence. The louder that silence resonates, the more those around you will strive to keep you within their orbit. This desire is not rooted in loyalty, but rather in self-preservation, and it is this self-interest that often breeds the most enduring form of allegiance. However, this is where many falter. The temptation to overreach can be overwhelming. You must resist the urge to flaunt your power or issue demands the moment you sense your advantage. Such actions will only draw attention to yourself, transforming you from an unseen force into a visible target. Silent acquisition thrives on a seamless existence. The instant you wield your indispensability as a weapon, you disrupt the delicate balance you've cultivated. Instead of being seen as the solution, you risk becoming the problem. Therefore, it is crucial to remain composed and discreet. Maintain your generosity, even while holding all the cards. Offering kindness from a position of strength is not a sign of weakness. It is a demonstration of true dominance. This is the kind of authority that naturally asserts itself without the need for forceful enforcement. Machiavelli didn't lay out his teachings in straightforward chapters. Rather, he conveyed his wisdom in fleeting glances, in the pauses, and in the subtle spaces between words, inviting you to connect the unspoken dots. If you possess the acuity to recognize these nuances, you also hold the power to wield them effectively. He understood that power is not about brute force, it's about resonance. It's about being present in pivotal moments, addressing challenges that others shy away from, and then, when the moment is right, stepping back just enough for others to feel your absence. This is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a recalibration, a gentle reminder that the world operates more smoothly when you are at its core. And if you think this is the conclusion, think again. This is merely the underlying rhythm, the silent pulse that drives everything you will ever create. Power is not something to be seized. It is something to be absorbed. It is intricately woven into the very fabric of existence. If you appreciated this deep investigative dive into the unknown, hit the like button. Our mission is to find the truth behind the vast mysteries of the universe. Subscribe to become an essential part of that mission. And in the next video, we'll discover, if someone ignores you, do this and they'll chase. Machiavelli.